Kitco News special coverage of the Gold Forum Americas is brought to you by new Pacific Metals and Silver Core Metals.
Is producing gold a societal good? The World Gold Council thinks so. I'm with Terry Heymann. He is CFO of World Gold Council. Thank you very much for joining Kitco.
Michael, great to be here. Thank you very much.
Let's talk about the study. Now, looking at it, what you're talking in a recently published report, you say that gold has societal and economic contributions to developing countries.
Absolutely. We are, as you know, a membership association. Our members are the world's leading gold mining companies, and we ask them to quantify the economic impact that they have in the communities and countries where they operate. We aggregated that, and the results are really impressive. So we're looking at $38 billion of expenditure that comes from these mining companies in those communities and countries. The vast majority of it stays in country. It's obviously coming in the form of salaries and wages. It's coming, that's about $7 billion globally, $8 billion in taxes and royalties, which really underpins the ability of these countries to develop. And then a huge part in terms of local procurement and actually supporting the economic engine of growth in so many of these places. And think about where mines are. They're often remote, they're in rural locations. Mining companies that are responsibly run are a real economic driver for the community, the country, and supporting the social infrastructure as well. And I think it's a really important aspect of the gold mining sector that perhaps doesn't always get thought about, this care and attention to building societies around the gold mine.
Now, you mentioned in the report that the contribution to government coffers is actually quite a small part of the overall benefit. And then I guess this has to go with the other benefits in terms of like taxes and contractors and then building jobs in local communities.
Yeah, look, I don't think the contribution to governments is small. I think 8 billion is a significant
Relatively
number.
Small, yeah.
Well, but then you look at the overall cost of where the money is going. This is about creating economies. And that's what gold mines do. They are so often in places where there is no other economic activity. And you need an ability to provide those taxes and royalties to support the government to deliver on its responsibilities, on providing healthcare and social care support systems to communities, education. So what we're looking at is the role that these companies play, yes, in running a profitable business, that's what they should be doing, but at the same time, supporting that economic contribution, and taxes and royalties is a very important part of it. And don't forget, with every employment, there will be secondary taxes that come out of that, ditto those supply chain and the opportunities. So there is a multiplier effect that you see from all of these activities.
How are we getting in terms of maintaining carbon dioxide and reducing emissions?
So I think reducing emissions is obviously a really important goal for global society at large. And I would say the gold mining industry has an opportunity to be at the forefront. If you look at an average mine, there is, yes, a reasonable amount of energy use, of course. There's also, in so many cases, the opportunity to decarbonize very significantly. Why? Because these mines are so often in places where renewables is an option. And when you start to put those renewables in place, it obviously decarbonizes. And so the advantage and the attraction of the gold mining sector is we need industries that can decarbonize. In order to meet the Paris goals and get to net zero by 2050, we need to find these opportunities of decarbonization. One of the world's largest solar arrays is in Burkina Faso, attached to a gold mine, providing electricity, yes, to the gold mine, but beyond to the local community. We're seeing other examples like that in West Africa, which is a great example, but across the world, where taking the technology that can now deliver this energy and harnessing it for the mine, but also for the local community, I think it's a really exciting story for the gold mining sector.
When mining does get criticized, I think it comes often kind of from the artisanal side. So I think of kind of like blood diamonds, or I think of what was kind of the difficulty in terms of like mercury and gold mining, which is happening in Brazil. What is the state of artisanal mining? Are you seeing that countries are putting in more regulation, so they actually have companies that, how would you say, fall under greater regulation? Or is it something that mining is always going to be under?
Look, the whole issue with artisanal mining is complex.
Yeah.
At its core, it's a development issue. Yeah. It happens when there aren't the opportunity for these people to provide for their own livelihoods. and they often resort to mining with very poor environmental and social practices. And that is a topic that needs to be addressed absolutely by governments and by regulations. But it's not going to only be addressed by governments and regulations, because so often those governments don't have the capacity to be able to implement the regulations that they themselves put in place. So there needs to be a collective effort to identify alternative livelihoods, to identify improved working practices. For example, there are a number of initiatives in place to reduce mercury, which, as you say, is very often used in artisanal mining. It's not used in large-scale professional mining. And improve understanding of environmental practices, even to reduce links around conflict. And we've seen global regulation around that, both through the OECD and the Dodd-Frank Act, Section 1502. So there is a lot of effort and focus on addressing some of the challenges, but these are not easy challenges, and it's going to take a long concerted effort. It's an area that isn't really what large-scale miners do. They operate in a very different way. But we have recognized that the entire mining industry has a role to play in helping build these partnerships to drive progress. And we've actually put out a report fairly recently, a couple of reports on artisanal mining. One looking at lessons learned on the interface when you do have large-scale mine near an artisanal mine. No one answer, but a few ideas and suggestions of approaches that can be taken that can help address what is, again, a really challenging situation. The other report that we put out is looking at the role of central banks. And some of these countries, the central banks actually get involved because they want to buy the gold and hold it as part of their reserves. As you know, gold has a really important role to play in central bank reserves. This is an interesting idea for a number of central banks, and we've done a little bit of work to try and help share some of those lessons across the central banking community.
When you go to countries that are developing a mining economy and say that they have some artisanal, do they always say, like, I wish that we had more organized mining? Is something that we really see that we need a need for, or is it something that you would say that you have to do an introduction to in terms of showing what the benefits would be?
I think most countries around the world recognize the benefits that large-scale responsible gold mining brings in terms of developing a resource professionally, in providing that sustained social and economic impact, and in caring for the environment, with a real emphasis on managing the landscape for the duration of the mine and beyond closure. Where I think you sometimes see the artisanal is sometimes just depending on the deposit. It's more suitable for different types of mining, or economic viability. And for large-scale mining, there isn't the economic opportunity on that. So it's not always a simple case of either or. And again, many artisanal mining sites exist because there are poor people who are open to exploitation and who do not have alternative means of providing livelihoods. And again, it's a development issue that the development community needs to really be taking the lead in addressing.
It's been fascinating in this industry because the mining community and the juniors have just, wholly embraced ESG, or I should say that they really need it. It's something that they need to have quantified and presentable for them because they need to kind of take that to the investors. I'm interested, though, what happens with companies and organizations that become, how would you say, government-owned. Do those things become more opaque right now? I would think, for example, of like what happened with Kupol in Russia, for instance, or what happened with Centerra's last operations with Kyrgyzstan, for instance. I assume kind of understanding a bit more about what these organizations do and in terms of like how they're going to be meeting ESG and developmental goals, that's kind of a little more difficult at that point.
Look, for sure, ESG is an important issue, and the investors are driving that, and rightly, that's good. Mm-hmm. And I think we're seeing, and Denver here is a great example, the capital flow to those companies that can explain what they are doing in managing their ESG performance. Without getting into specific situations, and I'm not well placed to comment, whenever you have different ownership, it presents different challenges in terms of the ESG management. What I would say is, from an investor perspective, if you're looking at buying gold, the way the world works in the refining of gold, there is a relatively limited number of refiners who are accredited by the LBMA And anybody who wants to have confidence that the gold they're buying is responsibly produced should buy gold from a LBMA listed refiner, because they have to follow the LBMA's responsible guidance, which really sets out sourcing requirements and puts the onus on the refiner to make sure that the mine that they're acquiring the gold from is operating in a way that is appropriate from an ESG perspective.
Let's step back and talk about these markets. So last I checked, right now gold is probably about 1670. I think today, this is on Monday, it's the start of Gold Forum Americas. I also think I saw silver was like about kind of in the low 19s. What's happening right now with the markets? This is just being entirely driven by what's happening with the Fed.
Clearly the Fed has a large part to play in this, and the tightening we're seeing. At the same time, we are in a marketplace that is pretty unusual and unpredictable. At least we haven't been here for a long time. Inflation rates are clearly very high, and obviously the Fed and other central banks are taking action. So you've got these competing narratives for gold. On the one hand, the Fed and the tightening and dollar strength. On the other hand, inflation and the recognized ability of gold to act as a store of value and a hedge against inflation. And yeah, the gold price has fallen in dollar terms. In many other currencies, it hasn't. And that's important when you're thinking about how you're investing and your perception as sort of what your baseline currency is and how you approach it. But it's a challenging time. It's a challenging time for so many households. And I think there'll be many people who are glad of their gold holding and will glad to keep holding on to gold, because in all this volatility, they know they've got that stability. Yes, it will go up and down a bit, but over time, over generations, over millennia, gold has demonstrated itself as that enduring store of value.
Terry, thanks for speaking with Kitco.
Very nice to speak with you. Thank you, Michael.
My name's Michael McRae. I'm with Kitco Mining. You're watching Gold Forum Americas here at Colorado Springs.
Kitco News special coverage of the Gold Forum Americas is brought to you by New Pacific Metals and Silver Core Metals.